You're on your deathbed, fading in and out, experiencing the world. And what do you think is going through your head? Today's review is Paul Harding's short book, Tinkers. This book was considered an indie hit, and it was released by a small independent publisher and came out in paperback in 2009. It was Paul Harding's first book and remains to be one of his only published works. It won the Pulitzer Prize as well as the Penn Bingham Prize, and because of the recognition from those prizes, it did become very popular at the start of the decade. So one bookish thing about me is that when there are pages of quotes at the beginning of the book, so these are quotes from critics and from publications that review books, I do actually go through and read all of those quotes. Some of those descriptors do, I think, inform my own reading a little bit, but mostly I'm looking at who exactly is reviewing the book. And if it's a publication like the New York Times, I'll go and I'll actually read the entire review. Usually not until I've completed the entire book, though. But I have been in the situation where there's 5 or 6 full pages of those little snippets of quotes of reviewers. Usually it's people praising the book. But once I finish the book, in these cases that I'm thinking of, I end up thinking that the book was pretty bad. So for the most part, I do take the little snippets at the beginnings of books with a grain of salt. Tinkers actually was one of those books where I did not feel that the reviews were an accurate representation of Harding's work. So I'll talk a little bit about the premise of the story before I go into why I wasn't as crazy about it. There are 4 parts of the book, and it opens with a man whose name is George Washington Crosby, on his deathbed in New England, and his perceptions of the world are extremely scattered and fragmented. There's some memories of his father and of his family when he was a young boy. There's snippets of books that he's reading about horology, which is the practice of clock repair. And there's extended metaphors of what he's imagining is going on around him in real time. The second part is the story of his father, who's a guy who goes around selling household items to people and who's actually sent to a mental institution because of chronic seizures. The third part of the story is the story of his father, who was a pastor, also sent to a mental institution. And the fourth and final part returns us to the present, to the dying George Washington Crosby, and gives us more of the style from part 1, which again is kind of fragmented memories and really detailed sensations that he's feeling. There is a kind of twist to the end of the book, which I won't give away, though I did not really find it that fulfilling. So in school, we're told to write from an outline. We're told to structure our writing. In my experience, though, some of the greatest fiction writing, I don't really think that the authors do that. I think it's Jordan Peterson who talks about how Dostoevsky seems to not know how his books are going to end. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's also quotes of John Steinbeck who talks about letting the characters have this sense of freedom to take on the direction of the plot, rather than forcing them into a more prescribed sequence of events. I do feel that Paul Harding, in his book Tinkers, is an example of a writer who's created a blueprint for his writing that has this kind of macro structure, so again with the 4 parts of the novel. And then within those parts, he can become a little bit more spontaneous, but perhaps it's that planning out of the spontaneity that I kind of dislike. Instead of just being spontaneous, I think he seems to be telling himself something like, okay, this is the part of the book that I can switch to stream of consciousness. Okay, now I'm going to do it. And I think that that level of self-awareness in the arts is pretty hip, perhaps due to this kind of postmodern trend in general. But Tinkers is also a very fragmented text. It switches from stream of consciousness moments to passages that are supposed to be cut and pasted from this book about clock repair. And I'm not saying that fragmented texts can't work. I'm just saying that it seemed too much like a very carefully controlled free write. So the nature of Harding's descriptions throughout the book range from vague to very smart, though I would not say wise. I do think that there are very striking passages, though. Passages that made me wonder, this Paul Harding guy must write a lot of poetry. I am made from planets and wood, diamonds and orange peels. Now and then, here and there. The iron in my blood was once the blade of a Roman plow. Peel back my scalp, and you will see my cranium covered in the scrimshaw carved by an ancient sailor, who never suspected that he was whittling at my skull. No, my blood is a Roman plow. My bones are being etched by men with names that mean sea wrestler and ocean rider, and the pictures they are making are pictures of northern stars at different seasons. So there are those kind of vague poetic passages that are sprinkled throughout primarily parts 1 and 4 of the book. So I think that people who would enjoy this book, Tinkers, are people that enjoy poetry or something that is meant to be read a bit more slowly and pondered over, like poetry. I didn't feel there was that much agency in the work other than the fact that it is a very short book. I think it's about 190 pages. So you always feel like you're able to finish the book because it's that short. But I would also really recommend watching some interviews with Paul Harding before you read his work, because I think you'll see that he did, in fact, achieve what he set out to do. The most that I can say in the end is that I just happened not really to care for the work that much. Tinkers, Paul Harding.